Well, let's make a start, shall we? So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I'm delighted that you can join us for today's sessions. I think you're going to really appreciate the material we've got for you, and I'm sure there'll be some great opportunities for you as well as you participate in this program. Today's session is really a continuation of the missions that we ran sort of a few weeks ago now of the GCRF AgriFood Africa program. And we are really honing in on some key issues. And so that's why we're talking about focusing on the specific, because we're hoping that that sort of narrowed focus will really benefit our members as you participate with us in this program. So today's session is all about gender and its place within the Agri-Tech Catalyst Round 10 specifically, why this is important to us, and what it is that we're trying to achieve by having this particular focus. We've got some fantastic speakers with us today on the call. They'll be doing their presentations. Some of them will be live, some of them will be pre-recorded to avoid any potential technical issues. And at the end of the session, we'll have opportunity for a very brief question and answer. So if you did have questions, you can ask those using the question and answer. If you use that, you can submit your questions and we'll see if we're able to get to some of those questions. Just a couple of housekeeping points I just want to mention so that you're aware. Firstly, if you would stay muted throughout the presentation just to avoid any background noise coming in. If you want to ask a question, like I mentioned, you can do that through the chat panel. This webinar is being recorded and we will make it available on our YouTube channel, so you can rewatch this. And if you are watching it on the YouTube, welcome to yourself as well. We are having a networking session at the end of the day, and I would very much recommend that you make the most of that. You need to sign up to the Meeting Mojo to do that. The link to that will be posted for you in the chat, but do please sign up for that and make the most of the session. So without further ado, let me go through the day's events. We've got the gender inequality session now. We've got a theme discussion on finance and insurance. You will have had an invite if you've been able to come to that. We've had to have a brief amount of people coming just to make the most of it. So we've allocated places to those we think would be of most benefit. And we've got a research and training early afternoon, and then in the networking to round off the day. So today's session on gender equality, this is who we have speaking this morning. We've got a fantastic panelists, group of panelists with us. We've got Catherine Miller from Innovate UK, who'll be talking about the catalyst briefly and how that's impacted. We've got Melody, who's going to be talking about agri-food and gender and its place within that industry. We've got Zoe Jones from Innovate UK talking about why we're concerned with EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. We've got John Jones joining us for a live presentation on his work, and Azumi as well, talking about her work. So without further ado, let's start the session.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar and this session on Agri-Tech Catalyst Round 10, Gender Equality. So in this presentation, I'm going to briefly cover the application process, just so you know what the process is, and then I'm going to go into more detail about the guidance around the Question on Gender Equality Act. So when you apply for Agri-Tech Catalyst Round 10, the first thing you need to fill in is the project details section. This section isn't scored, and this includes a short summary, a summary of your project and the objectives and what is innovative about it, a public description which describes your project, and this will be published if you're successful, so make sure you don't include anything that is commercially sensitive. There's a section on scope, so how does your project align with the scope of this competition? And then you'll be asked two questions. The first one is around equality, diversity and inclusion data. So this is to collect data around equality, diversity and inclusion, and this links to a short survey. And the second question is on the consortium. So you need to list all the organisations in your project, whether they are an administrative lead, a technical lead, and the countries that they are based in. Then you'll go on to the application questions. So there are 11 main questions, and there's detailed guidance associated with each of these questions on the Innovation Funding Service. But what I'm going to do is focus on question 7, which is the International Development Gender Equality Act question. So this is the question that you are asked on the International Development Gender Equality Act compliance. So how is your project compliant with the International Development Gender Equality Act 2014, and how is your project helping to promote gender equality and social inclusion? To answer these questions, you need to explain who is involved in your project. To make sure that your innovation has the highest chance of being successfully adopted, you need to understand the cultures, attitudes, and other context-specific factors in the African country you're focusing on. In order to deliver the desired economic and societal impacts, you'll need to take into account gender equality and social inclusion. So you'll need to highlight any relevant diversity and social inclusion experience or expertise that you have within the core project team and also their organisations. Provide information on any partner organisations that you're already working with and their role and expertise related to gender equality and social inclusion, such as community groups, NGOs, or government stakeholders. Identify where you see the need to build new links with partner organisations and why. You also need to explain how your project will address gender equality and social inclusion issues, including for poorer consumers, people who are disabled, and people who are older. How you will measure this, and then also how this will feed into the overall project plan, which is covered in question 8. And you need to describe what the potential is of your project. So describe your current understanding of the expected outcomes of your project and benefits of your innovation and of your project on gender equality and social inclusion. Include any potential negative effects that you think might or could occur through your project and innovation and how you plan to mitigate against these. And describe any gaps in your current understanding and how you intend to address these. To find out more and to read the guidance in full, these 3 links go through to the early stage, mid-stage and late stage competition briefs. You can find the full guidance here, as well as further information on the scope and eligibility criteria. Here is just a timeline just to remind you of the key dates. So the competition isn't actually open yet, it opens next week on the 20th of July. We have had theme-specific brokerage events. These were held last week, but you can also view these on YouTube. We have an online competition briefing on the 28th of July. The submission deadline is 21st of October. You'll be informed as to whether you're successful on the 18th of December, and projects need to start by April 2021. We have a customer support email and phone number for any queries, and you can also contact the Knowledge Transfer Network for support and advice around your application. Information on the call can be found on the website on the competitions page as well. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to KTN now to introduce the next speaker.
Good morning to all. I am Dr. Melody Mens-Kutsia, a senior researcher in the Food Systems Research Network for Africa, or FSNet Africa, a project funded under the African Research University Alliance and UKRI partnership through the Global Challenges Research Fund. I am based at the Centre for the Advancement of Scholarship at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. To contextualize my presentation today, I want to briefly look at the ways the agri-food system intersects with the Sustainable Development Goals, as this provides a useful framework for looking at gender equality in the agri-food system. First and foremost, the obvious connection is to achieving food security and alleviating malnutrition in SDG 2, which in turn has positive outcomes in public health linked to SDG 3. We also know there is an extensive body of literature linking food systems transformation to reduced poverty levels in developing contexts, linked to SDG 1. From an agri-food systems perspective, we need to consider the interrelationship between agriculture as a component of the food system and SDGs that relate to environmental sustainability. For example, SDG 13 on climate change and 15 related to life on land. Because agriculture contributes to and is affected by climate change, there is a need for climate-smart agriculture that considers the environment integral to the food system. On the other hand, access to nutritious food and improved livelihoods does not only depend on boosting agricultural productivity. The coordinated actions of the food industry across the entire value chain, along with consumers, are crucial to promote sustainable consumption and production, which will enable the reduction of all forms of food losses. Within this complex interconnected set of systems, we can examine gender in the agri-food system, which of course speaks to SDG 5, eliminating all forms of gender inequality. Women play several important roles in the African agri-food system. Before we start to look at some details in this regard, it is necessary to note that the specific roles women play vary widely by region and by country within sub-Saharan Africa. And these roles are also changing over time as social, cultural, economic, ecological, and political conditions change. So with this brief introduction, we look at some of the specific intersections between gender and the African food. Women play a significant role in food production in sub-Saharan Africa. Estimates differ and some myths exist about women's contribution to food production. Methodologically and with available data, it is hard to accurately apportion the exact amount of labor women contribute to food production in Africa. What we do know is that women make a substantial contribution. In fact, simply looking at the amount of labor women contribute may actually underestimate their involvement. Women have roles in agricultural production that are paid and unpaid, and some have argued that their contributions may be underestimated when labor estimates focus exclusively on paid work. So for example, work in kitchen gardens or tending to small livestock or poultry is often not considered agricultural work, but does contribute significantly to household food production. Women also have important roles to play in food processing and preparation, providing nutrition and contributing to household nutrition and food security. Women are tasked with purchasing the household's food, and almost universally, women are responsible for the preparation of safe, nutritious meals for their family, having a high degree of influence on the diversification of household food intake. When women have direct control over income, they tend to spend it on the well-being of the family, particularly on improving the nutritional security of the most vulnerable members. Broader demographic trends are also impacting the role women play in African food systems. Urban migration patterns in Africa are leading to an increase in female-headed households in urban areas, as males move to urban areas to seek higher earning employment opportunities. This has several implications for food systems, and currently female-headed rural households are at an increased risk for food insecurity. Despite the contributions of women within the food system, through agricultural production, food processing, and food preparation, They face significant and persistent gender inequalities. Each of these inequalities has negative impacts within the system, limiting the contribution of women to the food system and sustainable development, but importantly, also limiting the ways in which women can benefit from food systems activities. Although there are variations at country and regional level in terms of scale and extent, within the African food system, women have less access to productive resources and agricultural inputs, and less access to technologies in the value chain, including less access to technologies that help reduce post-harvest losses. They have less access to credit and financing to support their farming activities, receiving both fewer and smaller loans. Women have unequal access to land, and land tenure systems do not favor women. Women have been found to be more vulnerable and less resilient to risk, climate change, and environmental degradation, partly as a result of all of the above factors. Women are also underrepresented in decision-making forums, at household level, at community level, in the scientific workforce, and in policy-making spaces. They generally have less time available to focus on income-generating activities, bearing a higher proportion of domestic care and responsibilities in the household. They tend to be paid less for the work they do and do not always have decision-making power over the income they generate. They have lower levels of literacy and access to education, including less access to extension services and training. And despite their important role in the food system, women are disproportionately affected by the triple burden of malnutrition. Given the layers of inequality embedded in the system, it is not surprising that women are far more vulnerable to shocks in the agri-food system. A clear case is illustrated in the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 is increasing women's caregiving burdens because children and the elderly are at home more, and women are much more likely to be caring for the sick. That extra time makes it challenging to spend time they need on farming, with implications for productivity. Many women rely on informal face-to-face networks to access information. Mobility restrictions and social distancing are impacting these networks. And as women access technologies differently than men, technology solutions for information sharing in the pandemic are less effective for women. As markets close and cross-border trade deteriorates, women may struggle to access the resources that they need for farming activities. Already less mobile than males, restrictions and caregiving burdens will make access even more challenging for women. When a crisis hits, women are usually the first to start eating less or eating last, to make sure that their families can get enough to eat. Not only does this mean more women than men are likely to go hungry during the pandemic, it also means that women will have fewer nutrients needed to boost their immune systems in fighting the disease. We also know that women are at heightened risk for gender-based violence and sexual exploitation in the pandemic, as food quantity and quality decreases and life stresses soar. Where women are able to remain mobile and continue their role in buying food for the household, this role may put them at higher risk for exposure to COVID-19. All these disparities have implications for the development goals in Africa, and there are compelling reasons why they need to be overcome. In 2016, the Food and Agriculture Organization estimated that if women farmers had the same access to resources as men, the number of hungry people in the world could be reduced by 150 million due to productivity gains. Over the past decade, not surprisingly, there has been increased attention paid to the agricultural productivity increases that could be achieved by empowering women. By reducing inequalities in terms of land access and tenure, access to extension services and financing, as well as technologies, we can increase the uptake of climate-smart agriculture amongst women and equalize the benefits that men and women derive from these approaches. Eliminating disparities for women, including specifically eliminating disparities in access to and uptake in technologies, could make positive contributions to decreasing post-harvest losses, as expressed in SDG 12.3.1. Importantly, by equalizing the economic benefit derived from food systems activities, we can make important progress towards reduced poverty. While addressing inequality in the agri-food system does present an opportunity to improve all of these outcomes in the broader system, we should not lose sight of the opportunity to fundamentally eliminate these inequalities for the benefit of women. We need to caution against unintentionally placing the burden of fixing the agri-food system on women in a way that does not account for their preferences or their priorities. The empowerment of women should not only be about the benefits that equality would bring to others, but also about the benefits to the women themselves. So whilst equality will bring about positive outcomes, we should not lose sight of the fact that equality is in itself an important outcome. So this brings us to the question of what can and should be done. Eliminating inequality in the agri-food system is a shared responsibility where women play an important role, but not an isolated one. We need context-relevant, evidence-based policy and program design. National and regional level plans related to agri-food systems need to more intentionally integrate gender aspects. Programs and interventions across sectors and stakeholders should consider the gender lens in all their programmatic design. Programs, policies, and interventions should be informed by context-specific and up-to-date, reliable data, which in itself presents a challenge that needs to be overcome. We need to ensure that women's voices are integrated into policy and program design. Bringing women to the table and ensuring that their voices are heard is the only way to ensure that the priority and needs of women in the food system inform our approaches. We also cannot achieve equality for women by ignoring gender relations in the broader context of families, communities, and institutions. For example, we can't reduce the time and energy burdens of household work, including food processing and preparation, without engaging both men and women in our approaches. We need multi-stakeholder approaches that address the multidimensional nature of inequality. We must work to eradicate all forms of inequality that women face in the agri-food system. If we address only one aspect, such as women's access to education or information, but fail to address issues related to land ownership, for example, we will not be able to eliminate inequality in all its forms and achieve the wider gains in the food system. This, of course, can only be achieved through partnership across sectors and stakeholders. We also need to increase accountability and improve mechanisms for monitoring. from the highest strategic level to the program and intervention level. We need to hold role players accountable for implementing policies and programs that positively contribute to gender equality. This does mean that we will need to adapt monitoring and evaluation practices so that we can identify what works and what we can scale up. With these thoughts, I will conclude and look forward to the opportunity for discussion later in the session.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Zoe Jones, and I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Programme Lead at Innovate UK. Firstly, I want to apologise that I can't be there in person, but here's a picture of me instead. I'm going to start out by talking to you about why equality, diversity and inclusion is so important in business and innovation. Then I'll go on to talk a bit about our approach at Innovate UK to promoting equality, diversity and inclusion across everything that we do and through our targeted programmes. And then I'm going to take you through in a bit more detail about what we expect to see from you in your applications to the AgriTech Catalyst, specifically focused around gender equality and social inclusion. I wanted to start off by explaining how embracing diversity and inclusion is a huge opportunity for business. It's not just a nice to have, it can fundamentally enhance profitability. This McKinsey report on diversity found that when specifically looking at gender diversity on executive boards, financial performance was boosted by 21%. And when the focus was on ethnic and cultural diversity in executive boards, the increased financial performance was even higher at 33%. But in the context of this competition, the impact on your own business and your business within the UK context is a secondary impact. But I wanted to start off with that positive opportunity focus. While equality, diversity and inclusion is good for business, there's so much that can go wrong without it. A lack of diversity and embedded bias can have serious implications on innovation and its impacts. This can happen due to a lack of diversity in the teams and businesses working on the innovation, inherent personal and systemic biases, and new products and services that are created by businesses can reinforce and propagate these biases if equality, diversity and inclusion is not properly addressed. For example, Google's speech recognition software is trained predominantly on male voices, making the software 70% more likely to understand men. And there was recently outrage in a viral social media video over an automatic soap dispenser, which got all the way through the stages of design and product development, and the finished product didn't recognise black skin. All these stats prove there is a lot that can go wrong without diverse teams, interaction with a diverse pool of users, and a strong exploration of potential markets. At Innovate UK, we're committed to encouraging equality, diversity and inclusion in business-led innovation. We believe that the best ideas for innovation can come from anyone, and we want to tap into that widest pool of talent available. That diversity within business is proven to contribute to enhanced performance and commercial success, and that diverse teams produce better outcomes. We deliver a series of targeted programs which tackle underrepresentation in innovation, and one of those programs is the Young Innovators Competition. That's a partnership with the Prince's Trust, and it's designed to support young innovators aged 18 to 30 from diverse backgrounds to take their idea and turn that into a reality. We also run Women in Innovation, which we started back in 2016 when we discovered that only 1 in 7 applications to Innovate UK's funding and support were led by women. This has now increased to 1 in 4. And both those programmes include financial support and tailored non-financial support. Importantly, we also work with other programmes and teams across Innovate UK and UKRI to ensure that EDI is embedded across everything we do throughout the different programmes we deliver, our systems and our processes. We have 3 key focus areas in EDI at Innovate UK. Firstly, who is engaging in innovation, including who is benefiting from our funding and support, both as individual applicants and project teams, and who we can inspire to get involved in innovation, for example, in the future generation. Secondly, how the businesses and organisations we work with consider EDI, so encouraging businesses to have policies and plans in place, helping early stage businesses and SMEs think about EDI as they grow and scale. And finally, how EDI is considered in the development of innovation, so to ensure any potential bias is addressed, risks of excluding people are understood, negative impacts are mitigated, and economic and societal benefits are maximised. And that's something that we're increasingly doing and implementing across mainstream competitions at Innovate UK, like we do in the Agri-Tech Catalyst. So in the Agri-Tech Catalyst competition, there's a specific focus on gender equality and social inclusion. What we mean by that is that women, men, and other genders should have equal rights and entitlements to human, social, economic, and cultural development, and an equal voice in civil and political rights. Innovate UK and UKRI wants to ensure that through ODA funding in particular, inequality is not perpetuated, and that the different rights and needs of all genders are recognised and addressed, and that women and men share the benefits of research and innovation projects. So for that reason, all Innovate UK-led ODA programmes have a gender equality and social inclusion question, which forms part of the scope. This ensures that we're complying with the International Development Act, but actually the question is much broader than gender equality. And whilst that must be addressed, good applications show a broader understanding of diversity and social inclusion beyond gender. And I'll go on to talk a bit more about how we'd like you to think about that in your application. So a good place to start is by thinking about who is involved, who are the business and research partners that are involved in your project, and what is their experience and expertise in gender equality and social inclusion through previous projects, previous roles in different organisations. Are there any partners or collaborators that are fundamental to delivering the impacts that you set out in your project plan, specifically linked to gender equality and social inclusion? And are there any gaps in your knowledge in this area, and who might you need to engage with to fill this, and how do you plan to do that? Then thinking more specifically about how gender equality and social inclusion can actually be factored into your project plan. So how do you make those plans measurable? For example, by setting KPIs, targets for user engagement to ensure participation, strategies for ensuring that workshops are inclusive and interactive. They're just some examples from previous cohorts. So, and then thinking about what's the potential and what are the expected outcomes and of your project and benefits of your innovation on gender equality and social inclusion, the potential negative effects and how you plan to mitigate against these, and also to describe any gaps in your current understanding and how you intend to address these. And we're not expecting every single proposal to be explicitly linked to solving gender equality and social inclusion issues, and that's okay. But we are expecting you to provide really clear evidence in your answer that you've thoroughly considered these questions and factored gender equality and social inclusion into your project plans where that's appropriate. But as I mentioned previously, actually promoting gender equality and social inclusion more broadly is part of the ODA scope. So you do need to thoroughly think through and plan ahead for where you expect to use this funding to make a positive impact. And I think this is a great quote to wrap up the presentation, that the diversity is hugely important to innovation, and it's vital to generating new ideas, and disseminating new approaches. But it's not something that comes easily, and genuine innovation requires careful brokering of common ground between very different actors and mindsets. And as part of that, you need to ask questions such as who gains from innovation, by how much, in what ways, and with what development implications. And I thought that was a great way of considering or bringing together some of the questions that we are asking you as part of the application process. And finally, Innovate UK, working with the Knowledge Transfer Network, want to help more businesses and innovators to consider diversity and inclusion in their projects and businesses more widely. And we're currently exploring ways to do this through toolkits and sessions that we can deliver to the business community. We're running a series of engagements around that. And if you're interested in shaping what that might look like in the future and having your say, then please get in touch with my colleague, Shawan Smith, at the KTN, and she leads on diversity and inclusion there. So thank you all for your attention. If you've got, sorry that I can't be there in person to answer any specific questions that you have, but more than happy for you to get in touch via email, and my email address is just there. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of the session.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. We're now going to go to John Jones, who will be sharing his presentation. So he's just going to start sharing his screen and go straight over to you, John.
Hi, is that working?
Yes, you're on.
Right, my name's John Jones, no relation to the previous speaker as far as I'm aware. I'm one of the leaders for a project called Resolve, and I'll talk you through that now. So this is a project about potato. Potato is an extremely important crop in Kenya. It's a high altitude crop because it needs cool conditions. The areas in green on the map on the right there show where most of the potato is grown. The overwhelming majority of growers that grow potato are smallholder farmers, and it's a critically important food security crop, and also it's one of the few crops that's grown for income. And as one of the previous speakers has said, that can be a bit of a double-edged sword, depending on where the decision making about how that income is used is taking place. There are 2 crops per year for potato grown in Kenya, which is very unlike the situation in most of Europe, where we grow our potato on much longer rotations, once every 5 or 6 years in my part of the world. And that's not the case in Kenya. 2 crops a year are grown, and that's to be aligned with the rainy seasons. Rotation is barely used, and partly as a consequence of that, what that means is that yields from potato are declining. And the graph on the right-hand side of the screen that's just up here shows the trends in potato production over the past 10 to 15 years. One of the reasons for the declines in yield that we are seeing is pests and diseases, including something called potato cyst nematodes, which is my area of expertise. Extremely damaging pests. The picture on the top right here are the survival stage, the cysts of this nematode. They are small, about the size of a grain of sand, and they are the same color as soil. So you can imagine that finding these very small soil-colored cysts in a field full of soil is extremely challenging. It's also extremely difficult to persuade growers and farmers that the sort of damage you're seeing and yield losses you're seeing on your crop are down to something that can't be seen or found very easily. And potato cyst nematodes, like all potato pathogens, come from South America, where they co-evolve with solanaceous plants. They were brought into Europe in about 1850 with breeding material that was brought across to try and generate late blight resistance in potatoes after the Irish potato famine. And we've been kind enough to share the potato cyst nematodes almost everywhere that potato is grown in the world. Europe has acted as a secondary distribution center for potato cyst nematodes, and we think that's probably also how it got into sub-Saharan Africa on seed potatoes. A recent survey by our partners in Kenya has found that potato cyst nematodes are spread widely throughout Kenya. Anywhere potato is grown, more or less, including the seed growing regions, we're finding potato cyst nematodes as well. And more recently, we've also found that this nematode is now in surrounding countries. And The yield losses that, that are imposed due to the nematodes have individual and ecological scale impacts. The picture on the bottom left here is a lady we were talking to when we were out in Kenya in January before this COVID chaos came on, and this picture here, the bag of very, very small golf ball sized potato tubers was what she just harvested from the ground there. And of course that has an impact on her and her family. But also, you know, when we were talking to her, she was saying that the land was unproductive, and the consequences of unproductive land are shown in the bottom right-hand corner. You know, this all used to be forest. This is a picture taken in Uganda. The land in the area was deemed unproductive. This forest was cleared, and that's what you see in the foreground. And the remains of the first potato crop are what you see on the ground there. So the sort of yield losses due to disease pressure have got, you know, individual and ecological scale impacts as well. The drivers for variety choice in Kenya, I mean, one of the problems that exists is that the varieties that are grown are not resistant to pests and diseases. And there are two key drivers for variety choice in Kenya, and this is where I'll come on to the gender issues. First of all, I've mentioned that that potatoes, they wish to grow potatoes at twice a year. That means your variety of potatoes must have no dormancy. There's no cold storage anyway, so you can't store potatoes. And there's this desire to replant almost immediately after harvest. And the other key driver for variety choice is cooking time, and that's driven mainly by women. Women don't want to spend a long time cooking because that impacts the time they've got to do other tasks. And secondly, it's women in the parts of the world we're working that tend to have responsibility for getting the charcoal. They don't want to use more charcoal than they have to, or to go and fetch more charcoal than they have to. And the consequence of this is that as a particular variety called Shangi, then you can ignore the column on the left on this graph here. The green picture here, the green bar here, shows the proportion of land that's underneath the variety called Shangi. It was only introduced in 2012, and it's used now on something like 80% of smallholder farmer land. The reason for that is that it cooks incredibly quickly, and it's got zero dormancy. Shangi has no resistance at all to potato cyst nematode. The picture that's just appeared in the bottom right-hand corner is one of our partners in Kenya. It's one of the farmers that's running the field trial. And I was talking to his wife and the lady on the left there. They had planted a variety of potato called Manitou, which has excellent resistance to potato cyst nematode, but she was absolutely adamant that they wouldn't be growing it on their land again because it took an absolute age to cook and because they didn't like the way it tasted. So these are the key drivers in terms of variety choice. So our project and the way we're hoping to address this, we have managed to obtain some new potato lines that have been generated here at the James Hutton Institute that combine some of these desired quality traits. They've got potato called Solanum Foreca in their background, and this has got very low dormancy and it cooks very quickly. And you can see the yellow coloring in this tube here. They taste great because they've got lots of carotenoids in there. So we're hoping that by combining this Foreca background with resistance to the pests and diseases, we're going to provide a variety that allows this pest to be got under control, and that's going to be attractive to the people that they're going to want to grow it. A key part of the project is a series of farmer field days, including events targeting women. We've done this in the past. This was a field trial day in Malawi, and my colleague Leslie Torrance was doing. And these will include performance demonstrations showing that these varieties grow well in the field, that they yield well. And there'll be cooking demonstrations and taste tests. And critically, we'll be targeting women's groups as participants in these sorts of activities, because we know that it's critical to ensure that all the groups of people are represented at these field trial days. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through what we're trying to do. These are some of the people that are involved in the project, and I'll stop sharing and hand back.
Hi, Tim, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. Some technical issues my end. Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for that, John. I'm now going to pass over to Azumi, who is with us to share her presentation. So Azumi, if you would like to unmute yourself, I will share the PowerPoint from my end so that everyone has access to that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this presentation is on women's economic empowerment from the perspectives of agroecology in Africa. And we are sharing experiences under the Promoting Opportunities for Women's Empowerment projects and short power projects, which is implemented in 4 countries, but now we have it in 3 countries, Ghana, Rwanda, and Bangladesh. The 4th country was Pakistan, but due to political reasons, ActionAid Pakistan was closed down. So globally, we are targeting 9,500 rural women processors who are processors and farmers. The project is being funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs under their FLOW component, the Funding Leadership Opportunities for Women. We started in 2016 and is about to end this year, December 2020. The main focus objective was to ensure women's economic empowerment in these countries, contributing to their resilience, contributing to women's collective organization, which we will see in some of the upcoming slides. So specifically, it's meant to support increased women incomes and their ability to control their income, because there is difference in terms of having increase in income and also having control over the income and the decisions you make around what you use the income for, and also building their capacity to practice agroecology or CRSA, access markets, and be able to reduce workload within their households and communities. In Ghana, we are targeting 6,000 women in 8 districts. That is in Nanumba North, in Nanumba South, Talensi Nabdam District, Asusifi District, 10, and Adaklo District. And these are all in 5 geographic regions in Ghana. A picture of Ama, one of the rural farmers in her farm. Skip this. Yeah, I think the key intervention is we are mobilizing and organizing rural women into groups, movements, and platforms where they can advocate and become more visible to claim their rights and be able to influence the spaces right from the self, that is the individual level, self-awareness, to the households, local authorities, and to government, and also have the opportunity to partake in international spaces that they can share their experiences with global policymakers and other stakeholders. One of the key areas is also on unpaid care work, which also came out in the previous presentation in terms of the challenges that women face. And we are working to ensure that it is recognized, the burden is recognized, and adapting the 4R approach, but here I'm presenting the 3 Rs: recognition, reduction, and redistribution of unpaid care work among women and girls. And in terms of promoting food security and resilience, we are working with the pillars of agroecology, which I'll share in some upcoming slides. Then we have collective organization of women. This is just to show some of the strategies we are using in terms of building women's agency and promoting their collective organization to be able to be more visible as carers, to be more visible as women farmers, because most of the work women farmers do is not recognized in terms of policy and in terms of the decisions that policymakers face, leading to some of the challenges they face when it comes to accessing productive resources and when it comes to issues around unpaid care work at the household and at the community level. In terms of innovations around the intervention we are promoting, one of the key areas is time poverty, which we've tried to digitize it to support women to collect their own time use, track their own time use in communities and in different areas, both men and women, to compare their time use over time. And that gives us the evidence in terms of the advocacy we are doing around unpaid care work and decent work for the policymakers and even women themselves to really believe and recognize the disparity in terms of paid work, in terms of unpaid work, and in terms of the wages and salaries women receive when it comes to the work they do, because most of the work they do, the externality benefits other community members. It doesn't have direct impact on their own empowerment. And this is one of the innovations we have added to the project to ensure that whilst we are addressing issues of resilience and their ability to ensure food security, we are also working to ensure effective time use so that they can have more time for agricultural purposes. Another innovation is the provision of e-market information, e-extension services through a platform we have in Ghana, Isoko, and also the adoption of the female extension volunteer schemes, where females are trained to provide extension information and support to colleague females in their communities as a result of cultural barriers and other disadvantages that women face when it comes to accessing extension services in their communities. We are also working to see the intersection of all these areas to make care work more visible in the development sector and lay a program model that integrates unpaid care work with food security and gender-based violence with all stakeholders from local, subnational, national, and international level to ensure that we have a holistic programming that targets women's empowerment holistically without focusing solely on the issues of food security, issues of nutrition, issues of unpaid care work. But we are trying to integrate all these components to address issues of women empowerment holistically. Some strategies we have used include, in terms of addressing unpaid care work, men cooking competition, where we have an open contest with men in communities because the norm is that it is for women. It has been normalized as women's only domain, and to be able to change the beliefs, the norms and perceptions around it, we have to work towards changing the perception and belief of men, changing the orientation, the conversation. So we adapt men cooking competition as one of the key strategies where men lead their own shopping right from the market, decide what to cook, and you do this in the open community with other community members to look at it. Then you share your experiences. And this has really given us a lot of male champions and the understanding that it's really work. It's not like somebody saying, my wife stays at home for 24 hours without doing anything. Meanwhile, if we are going to count the clock from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m., the woman is really working a whole lot of activities, which is uncountable, but yet the person is that as not working. We've also provided time-saving interventions to women at the household level where it will reduce the time burden they have to use in collecting fuel and also water harvesting structures. Other agroecology measures also include stone bonding, mulching, which we'll see in some of this slide. So in terms of the pillars of agroecology action aid is promoting, we have 7 pillars, and one of them is gender equity and women's rights. We have adapted climate resilience and agroecology from a rights-based perspective, where we think that building women's agency is one of the key ways we can improve productivity and help them to increase income and access markets. So within this, building women's group dynamics is key, a powerful vehicle for their advocacy. We also promote household and community level decision making in terms of influencing spousal decisions at the household level, decisions on what to do with the education of children, especially on the girl child, awareness on time use and unpaid care work, and women's collective agency to access fertile lands So we have in total in Ghana, over 5,000 rural women accessing land with proper documentation, because the feeling was that you give the woman the land and then in a day, you don't even inform the woman that you are coming back for your land. They just walk in when they realize that they are making gains from the land. By then they have invested technology, they've invested time, they've invested approaches in terms of agroecology in the land, and then the men will come back for it without information. So what we have done is to facilitate documentation of these lands to ensure that they sign memorandum of understanding, they negotiate to agree on the period that this land will be used by women farmers as groups, as individuals, and to also ensure that individual women will have lands through their husbands without any hassle to be able to farm, especially female-headed households was a critical issue, widows and other people. We also have livelihood diversification in terms of supporting women to diversify their livelihoods and not depend solely on agriculture in terms of helping them to process shea butter, rice processing, and other products to be able to access rural markets. Then one of the greatest things along these pillars is supporting women farmers organization, where we have built out groups at the community level, women's platform at the district level, through to national level, where they have a common mouthpiece and they have strategies to advocate, an advocacy strategy that spells out what the movement is about. And they use this as a means to be able to influence local authorities to access productive resources and to be able to make themselves visible and to be part of the planning process of local assemblies to ensure that most of the issues they are demanding for are captured and are provided by local authorities. So various agroecology methods adapted by women farmers. We have stone bonding, we have local made compost at the community level, green manure that they use so that they don't have to depend on buying chemical fertilizer every season. We also have mulching that they adapted to be able to cover the soil, cover crops, reduce erosion and other practices. Yeah, we have the female extension volunteers, childcare centers where women can send their children to the centers and be able to engage in their processing and other activities. So in terms of impact, it has increased women income as a result of the use of indigenous seeds, the capacity to preserve their own seeds and also adapt to some of the agroecology methods mentioned, the use of multi-purpose trees, compost, and also controlling pests through their natural means, as well as accessing markets. We've also increased their voice and influence right from the household level to the national level. And also gender-based violence has reduced in terms of women able to raise awareness and empowerment in some areas, and they have been able to mitigate in terms of traditionally some of the norms that affect them. We have instances where women who are bleeding cannot go to their markets, widows cannot go to the market, but they have been history now. And this has been able to, we have been able to achieve this through women reflection and awareness raising meeting with men and husbands as well as traditional leaders. And also the influence to increase women bargaining power across board in terms of accessing productive resources and in terms of having control over the resources that they have been able to work for, and the use of their capacity in terms of the knowledge they have gained through various capacity building like communication and negotiation, legal processing in terms of meeting the standard requirement for processing in Ghana, as well as general communication and advocacy networking skills that have been provided under the project. So we have some links to some of our stories, and if you look at the recording, you can access some of the publications, some of the stories we have done as part of the project.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Azumi, for that presentation. And I think our time is probably not going to permit us to answer many questions. I did want to just ask one brief question that's come in, address this to Melody, if possible. It came in during your presentation, Melody, it's from Sophie, just asking about how to decolonize these projects to ensure a positive project legacy that is owned by the stakeholders and in-country partners. And being based in South Africa, I'm sure you'll have something to say about that. So would you just care to comment briefly on that, and then we'll wrap this session up?
Thanks, Tim. Struggling to find where to put my video back on. So sorry for being a faceless voice in response to the question here. So I think this question is not specifically about gender, but some of the principles that I was talking about apply. So A, from the point when an idea or a project or an innovation or a technology is conceptualized, who's at the table when those conversations happen? And whose voices get taken into account in the design process? Because I think that's one way to help build ownership of something. If somebody and if people are involved in designing and conceptualizing ideas that really speak to their needs and are driven from their preferences and priorities, that's critical. And then if we look at the other end of the spectrum and we ask the question, if this project, technology or innovation is successful and it works, who's going to derive the most benefit from that? And the answer to that question, I think, also has important implications, because it has to also be the people where that project or technology or innovation is being applied. And the extent to which that benefit is apportioned to them plays a key role. So for me, it's really from design through to success and benefit, whose voices are heard and who is deriving which benefits from what we do.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that answer. And I'm going to wrap up this session now, just because we are slightly over time, and I'm aware that we have our next session starting at 11 if you are attending that. Thank you very much to all our presenters, all our speakers. Wonderful material, and it would have been fantastic to have a Q&A, but the material is so good, I wanted to keep that rolling. So do feel free to watch this back on YouTube. And thank you once again to our speakers, and we will see you all shortly. Thank you and goodbye.